Right, I have 1 minute past the hour. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Appreciate everybody taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with Skills TX. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Blake Curtis. Been working real closely with Dr. Curtis lately. Exciting to have found somebody with a similar passion for the Sophia framework that you're going to hear a little bit more about here. And we're going to take about 30 minutes here. We try to keep these short, sweet, value packed, and full of information. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into chat. I can't guarantee you that we'll get to every one of them, but if we don't, we'll send you an offline message after the fact, and certainly look forward to continuing the conversation thereafter. Blake, take it away.
Thanks, John. So today we're going to be talking about how your hiring practices might be creating the workforce gap. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to hop into a little bit about me. My background's in cybersecurity, governance, risk and compliance, as well as IT auditing. I am the first scientist to scientifically debunk the years of experience fallacy. We'll cover that. But I'm also known for helping debunk Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule. It was already debunked before. I've added a little bit more data to it. I'll share a little bit more details about me at the end of this segment. Now, to get into this, we're going to debunk years of experience in just 3 minutes. I then want you to be able to take this back home or take this to your employer. I want to show you why we need to stop relying on resumes and don't boil candidates down to just bullet points, how that's very inequitable. Skill-based hiring and promotions. We want to change the conversation from how long you lived on Earth and how many years of its quote-unquote experience you have to actual demonstrable and observable skills, because that's what we're hiring for. That's what generates value. We then want to talk about the importance of using objective competency framework, how we want to quantify experience and how Sophia allows us to do that. We also want to highlight some characteristics or attributes that your organization may have that's actually contributing to the workforce gap. And you'll find one of those kind of funny. Then we'll talk about the obligations as leaders, as managers. There is a takeaway here, guys. When I present this to you, I want you to think about how you're there and responsible for developing your workforce and creating the next generation of professionals. And then lastly, we're going to support diversity, equity, inclusion, and show you why mandating years of experience actually disadvantages minorities, older professionals when you think about ageism, as well as younger professionals too. So in 2022, we ran an international study. This international study was called the Next Gen Cybersecurity Auditors. You can actually go Google it on Google Scholar. Now, we had 216 participants. 108 of those were IT auditors. The other 108 were subject matter experts. And these were cybersecurity professionals, IT professionals, as well as people who implement technology. Now, we discovered that 151,000 IT auditors in the Big Four as well as Big Tech, so that's Amazon, Google, that's going to be Deloitte, KPMG, and so forth, they have a significant knowledge gap between their theoretical knowledge, which is the book knowledge, and their practical skills. Now, when we talk about practical skills, that's dealing with audit tasks like interpreting technical evidence and identifying control risks and suggesting the appropriate controls. Now, the issue with this finding is that these gaps actually influence data breach likelihood. And so what we did is we had the assessment questions, and they were associated with the top notable breaches in the U.S. history. So that could be the Equifax breach, could be the Uber data breach, as well as the Marriott data breach as well. So as auditors, we have a negative 17% decrease from book knowledge to demonstrable skill, actually being able to perform the task on the job description. And what this means is that 8 out of 10 IT auditors have trouble interpreting technical evidence and identifying the safeguards that reduce data breach likelihood. Now, as IT auditors, we often serve as the third line of defense, and we have to check behind the technology implementers. However, let's take a look at the technology implementers. If we look at our SMEs, even though they implement technology, they had a negative 26% decrease from book knowledge to actual demonstrable skill. So what does this tell us? Now, this tells us that although we have 930 plus certifications, over 56 vendors, over 85% of those only focus on book knowledge, theoretical skill, and scenarios, and they do that through multiple choice exams. Now think about it. To protect our nation against international cyber threats, we're going to need to adopt a common framework and prioritize virtual and fictitious training scenarios and environments that allow us to verify our hands-on skills, not just book knowledge. Now, We're going to debunk years of experience together in just 3 minutes, okay? So first, years of experience presumes an individual works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that means on average, 1 year work experience is equal to 8,760 hours. And that's also assuming that you're working 52 weeks out the year. But we don't work 24/7, do we? Now, the average professional works 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and 52 weeks out the year. That's assuming no paid time off, no holidays. So on average, at max, you're going to get 2,080 hours. So if you look on the yellow diagram right there, you're automatically given 6,680 hours. You don't have to work for that at all. Now, 2,080 hours is not even equivalent to a quarter of the year. Think about that. Based on that math, it would take you 4 to 6 years to get 1 quantifiable year of experience. And your employer is mandating this right now. Surprisingly, though, the average professional only spends 2 to about 4 hours completing the activities in their job description. Now, why? That's because a lot of the time spent planning, emails, meetings, distractions, and instant messages. So if you're only averaging 1,040 hours doing the actual work, it would take you 7 to 8 years to get 1 quantifiable year of experience. Now, we also found in the study that increased years of experience does not significantly or consistently influence performance. Doesn't matter if I had someone with 10 years of experience or 5 years of experience. The guy with 10 years of experience is not doing any better, okay? And then years of experience does not consider how many hours the individual actually dedicates to performing that task in the day, and they don't consider the quality of their work. So yeah, you could have a bunch of years of experience, but is that experience any good? And what is the quality associated with it? Now we're going to talk about why we just don't want to rely on subjective resume reviews, okay? Now the first thing we want to think about is how job history does not communicate skill proficiency. In other words, subjectively looking at a resume and looking for these keywords doesn't distinguish what the candidate knows, which is book knowledge, from what the candidate can actually do, which is procedural knowledge. Also, just because a candidate hasn't spent a great deal of time at one place isn't an immediate red flag. Remember that these job descriptions, they're extremely subjective. And when they're extremely objective and they're not aligned to a common framework like Sophia, you're actually going to create a lot of confusion. Therefore, the candidate may be working in a role or a place that didn't do a good job of communicating expectations. And those expectations didn't align with their career path. So just remember, before judging someone else, think about some of the situations you've been in yourself. Higher degrees do not significantly influence performance. In fact, our international study, we had a few doctoral students, but at best they scored Sophia level 3, which is just average performance. But most of them were in Sophia level 2, which is not even in the proficient range now. They're more in the novice range and need a lot of help. However, the most interesting data point here was the master's degree students. There were more master's degree participants in level 1, the lowest competency level, than level 4, which is enable. Now, that brings us to proprietary job descriptions. They don't scale well, and they actually contribute to the workforce gap because you're just looking on Indeed and Monster. And so therefore, the definition of a system administrator will vary from organization to organization. Also, the common employer is going to trip up on very fundamental definitions like knowing the difference between knowledge, skill, and competency. Knowledge is book knowledge. Skill is demonstrable task performance, which you can actually do. And competency is both having the book knowledge and the skill proficiency and performing it at a certain level within a certain domain. So that's the difference there. Now, what this brings you to is these highly advertised certifications. They do not significantly influence performance. Even the gold standard, the CSSP itself, advertises itself as being the one certification that were certified people versus non-certified people. The certified people were supposed to perform better, right? Well, they don't. But think about that for a second. How can a multiple choice exam that prioritizes memorization actually ensure skill proficiency, high levels of task performance? Now, that was debunked in 2020. There was a study that was conducted. They showed that CSSP certified professionals did not outperform non-CSSP certified professionals when they were doing certain tasks. Additionally, in my study, what the CSSP found was that it was associated with overconfidence. That means people who had the CSSP rated themselves on average very confident in their ability. but when it came to actually identifying controls that resulted in data breaches, they were just either average performers or they were even novice performers. So in summary, a single certification does not influence proficiency. However, my study found that combining both implementing and auditing certifications as well as vendor-specific certifications, like in Microsoft, Kubernetes, Palo Alto, and so forth, those were associated with the top performers. Now, this is probably the fact because when you implement both a diagnostic and an implementing perspective along with something very specific, you're getting a systems thinking perspective at this point. And so you're not evaluating problems from a myopic viewpoint. Now, you're also dealing with real people who are supporting real families. Think if your daughter or your son or loved ones was on the other end of this hiring process. Would you quickly thumb through that resume or make a gut response or a quick decision? You probably wouldn't. And so you got to think about, why are we boiling down people to these bullet points? They're more than that. And why are we sending these generic email responses that say we're going to move forward with another candidate? And we don't give them anything they can work on. So should we be using a skills-based framework to identify the exact skills that were not demonstrated in the interview and then share that with the candidate so they can apply with us next year? Otherwise, our lack of empathy could dissuade future participants and further contribute to the workforce gap. Now, is my organization contributing to the workforce gap? If you're employing one or more of these practices, the answer is probably. So, are you hiring superstars instead of taking responsibility for developing them? Now, this was the first meme that came to my head. So, we've all been here, right? And this occurs when companies and hiring managers continue to look outside of their company because they don't have a good skills inventory. They don't have a quantifiable way to know what skills they do have or the skills they don't have. And so they don't have a way to develop a roadmap for their current employees. So what do you think happens if companies continue to use this practice? That's right. They're going to experience many people leaving the company, which unintentionally leads to other costs associated with attrition, associated with onboarding and training, and more importantly, that accumulated business knowledge that your current employees had, it's not there anymore. It's going to take you more time to get your external candidate acclimated to the culture and the politics of the business. Also, comparing current employees to job candidates. While I'm consulting a lot of leaders on workforce development from a business psychology aspect, this is something I see occur the most. Leaders truly believe that they have the top talent based on personal experience and anecdotal evidence. However, we do not have a quantifiable way to know how skilled our professionals are in relation to each other or in relation to the rest of the world. Why? Because we don't have a common competency framework like SOPHIA. Even if you say, oh, my candidates are all CSSP, all they have master's degrees, these qualifications are great, but they're not aligned directly to your job descriptions, and they often prioritize theory over practice. So as leaders, we have to have a mechanism that clearly distinguishes knowledge or a book knowledge and skills. You have to have that clear delineation, and we cannot use qualifications to alienate the other staff. Using qualitative performance reviews. This is the most critical aspect of workforce development, and many managers don't take this seriously enough. Simply giving someone a yep, you're on track, yep, you're doing good, doesn't pinpoint actual improvement opportunities for their skills, their behavior, or their leadership qualities. Remember, what we say and how we say it has a significant impact on our employees' morale, their belonging on the team, future participation, and it's often the number one reason for high attrition. This leads us to the next. Do not conduct your own salary research. Remember that your HR professionals are not scientists, psychologists, or statisticians. Although we try our best to play all of these roles, we must remember that expertise is domain specific. So what do? Well, you want to get independent research, and that's best conducted by a non-invested third party. And the reason why is you have to be 100% transparent about how you're coming up with your numbers. Otherwise, you're going to create some disloyalty within your organization because your employees don't trust your methods. So most importantly, if you find non-scientific rationale that justifies pay, like says, oh, we're going to justify your pay because you have 10 years of experience, you need to find another company to work with. Because We know that years of experience has been debunked, and we know that there's certain levels of quality, and it's not associated with time. And so your years of experience should never be your primary determinant for pay. And seeing how we broke it down into hours, I'm not sure we should use it at all, to be honest. Sending generic emails to candidates when not hired. We've all been here. You get a generic and unempathetic email that tells you that you're going to go with a quote unquote more seasoned or experienced professional. But they don't tell you what skills you were deficient in. They don't provide you with a general roadmap on how to improve. So think about that for a second. If we're not telling candidates quantitatively what they're weak in or what they can improve, what do you think that's going to do to them psychologically if they've been through that same process multiple times with the same generic feedback? This is where Sophia can come in and really shine. We're also over-relying on degrees, certifications, and years of experience. Now, in our international study, we found that if a candidate had 10 years of experience and he's performed a critical task in a job description, let's say he's done it 50 times, right? Well, you could take another candidate who only has 5 years of experience, and you look at one of those critical tasks on a job description, he's performed it 150 times. So why are you relying on time spent on earth or time spent in the role versus task proficiency? Doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And there's a key difference between years of experience and years of exposure. If you're going to have an equitable or objective hiring process, filter out your candidates based on what they can do, not how long they lived or held down a certain role. And you can do that with performance assessments. You can do that with a Sophia self-assessment or other types of evaluations. This is going to give your candidate pool all the same fair chances. So what can Sophia do for your organization and your workforce? So first, they're going to distinguish theory from demonstrable skill. But the second thing is that they focus on task-based experience instead of time-based experience or years of experience. Because you remember that high school student who failed multiple times? Well, by definition, they have more experience than you. Or even in big tech companies that have half the amount of experience as a competitor, but they outperform everyone else in numerous ways. So it's about what you can do, not how long you lived on Earth. We're also going to be able to reduce bias, personal preferences, and inconsistency. Because no matter how hard we try, we'll all exhibit some degree of unconscious bias for what we're used to or what we would like to see if a particular candidate was going to be hired. However, we should evaluate candidates against a common framework with clear expectations for right and wrong choices instead of just using these subjective personal experience. Because remember, the goal is objectivity, not subjectivity. Reducing gatekeeping. No longer can we tout how long we've held down a role or how long we lived on Earth. We're expected to keep up with our profession and protect society, and I do mean protect society. Many of us work in technology positions that are critical to protect the nation's critical infrastructure, like power, water, banking, and communications. Some of us are even responsible for protecting consumer data and health records. So what we could also do is align these salary ranges and roles to responsibility levels. So when pay ranges are based on skill proficiency and competency, this creates a level playing field for your workforce. It also incentivizes the workforce too, and it incentivizes high performance. Now why? Because we all agree on the exact skills that need to be considered for promotions. Unintentionally, this will also raise baseline competency for your entire workforce. Now, what are our obligations as leaders in organizations? One, we want to create equitable and objective hiring practices. We want to ensure that each candidate has the same experience as the last and is evaluated against a framework of agreed expectations instead of one hiring manager's personal preferences. Remember, none of us are trained or licensed skill assessors, so we need to be very humble and drop our egos. I would also recommend that you have an odd number of people on your interview panel because you can ensure that that third person has no affiliation with your group, no bias, but just want to make sure they have the appropriate experience to contribute a valuable opinion. What that does is help reduce groupthink and unconscious bias. Lastly, you need to be cognizant of how culturally diverse your panel is. Having diverse perspectives from all age groups and cultures will also help you reduce bias. Now, sustaining engagement, morale, and influencing participation. The only way you can do this as a manager is to know what skills each individual has and what they need to support the enterprise initiatives. Today, if you can't quantify the level of skill each member has in an objective manner, then you are working blindly and you're assuming instead of verifying. Now, this can be very hard to hear for a lot of managers, especially coming from someone who's younger. But remember, I'm an expertise psychologist, so I don't use anecdotal evidence. You have to remember, as leaders, we are obligated to lead by example and ensure that each person has the appropriate behavioral and soft skills needed to be successful. This is where Sophia can help you identify what drives your performance. That also brings you to identifying personality and learning style preferences. You're going to have a mix of high-performing introverts and extroverts. However, environments are often not set up in a way where their skills and personal preferences are actually shown for growth and collaboration. And people learn differently. This is where you can use Sophia in behavioral assessments for other reputable frameworks to improve your onboarding, your training, as well as your personal and career development opportunities. And then using a globally recognized framework. Think about how your one-on-ones should focus on your current skills versus your needed skills. Imagine being able to quantitatively justify your hiring and promotion decisions because you could quickly pull up a dashboard and clearly communicate where your skill gaps are instead of speculating and guessing. Lastly, since the entire organization is using a common framework and a common grading mechanism, you'll be able to reduce confusion, create more transparency, which also influences a sense of belonging and loyalty from your employees. Now, unintentionally today, the hiring and promotion practices are still disadvantaging women, minority, and older professionals looking for a career change. You got to think about that from an ageism aspect. This happens when older professionals are being interviewed by younger candidates against a subjective set of questions and criteria, as well as expectations, instead of using a common, globally recognized framework like Sophia. And we know that mandating years of experience with no statistical evidence starts really bordering on an ethical dilemma here. If we can't demonstrate why mandating something on our job descriptions is right, then who do you think it hurts? Our job description should be focusing on identifying the talent and the appropriate behavior instead of that superstar talent and that very niche person. Women were some of the first minorities in the workforce. It has statistically taken women longer to obtain positions of authority and influence. And the minorities and women are forced to play the game and fall victim to these unrealistic job descriptions. But many underrepresented populations are less exposed to STEM. Certain target groups are less exposed, quote unquote, experience to career paths in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now, this then brings up a good systems thinking archetype called success to the successful, or to the victor belongs the spoils. This happens when a person belongs to a certain demographic that is historically successful and is more exposed to knowledge in a specific profession. This long-term exposure gives them inherent advantages like a strong network of like-minded successful colleagues, family members, and better access to education. So this is why using time-based experience and unscalable practices will continue to disadvantage your minority workforce. So we've been confusing years of experience with years of exposure for many decades now, but experience is quantified by observable skills and repeatable task performance. Now, you want to also make sure that your interviewers are just as diverse as your interviewees. People want to work for an organization where they see people who share similar backgrounds and cultural experiences. I mean, this doesn't mean that we just hire for the sake of hiring, but it does mean we have to be cognizant of the interview and promotions and how they're perceived by people from different cultures and demographics. So what we should focus on is transparency, being upfront about how your hiring and promotions occur, aligning your skills with enterprise goals, prioritizing demonstrable skill over knowledge and time. Simply being exposed to something for a long time does not mean you're more proficient, and being rewarded for time spent in a seat could be viewed as unethical for some parties. And then we want to remove barriers for the next generation. You'll often hear people say, well, I put X amount of years into this, and you're going to have to do the same. But that's not true, isn't it? Our ancestors really worked on improving technologies and processes for decades to make it easier for us to obtain the careers that we want and accomplish the dreams that we want to have. So ask yourself, why would we continue to use antiquated processes that could potentially prevent the next generation from accomplishing their dreams? We have to be a lot more altruistic, and we have to think about the workforce that you want your loved ones and your friends to work in. Now, at a high level, you need to consider the four following things when you're doing your first Sophia assessment. We want to identify the current skills and future skills. You can do that by taking that Sophia assessment and potentially working with an independent Sophia skill assessor to verify that those skills are actually in place. Performing a skills gap analysis and prioritizing the retention of critical skills in your organization. And then turning your qualitative job descriptions into Sophia-based role profiles with clearly distinguished skills and skill levels. And then you can prioritize and retain your top performers. Now, let's take a quick look here. Let's look at proprietary hiring practices versus a globally objective framework. Some of the cons you'll see here is that HR and hiring managers are not speaking the same language, and they're not delineating between what is knowledge and what is skill. The other thing is that hiring managers are not certified skill assessors. They're just using anecdotal evidence. And we've all been there. We've done that for a long time. What we're actually assessing is familiarity and trust versus actually skill proficiency. And then the interview questions we have are so subjective. We came up with them ourselves. And at a minimum, we could at least use a skills database or a question database and agreed on the right and wrong answers. And so that means that the hiring and promotion process is inconsistent. No matter how well you want to do it, if you don't have an aligned framework, it's not going to scale well. And if that person leaves the company, they can't communicate what skills they have here objectively to another company. Now, if you look at this for a global objective competency framework, here we're actually using performance levels, levels 1 through 7. Level 1, just being in that follow position. Level 7 is that you're literally leading the organization, and we have quantifiable ways to delineate that. And what we're using is performance-based assessments, no longer just subjectively looking at a resume. We're extrapolating the skills from the resume in preparation for a skills discussion. Notice I said skill discussion, not an interview, because it seems a lot more difficult to get that across to the candidate. And the candidates are actually evaluated against job descriptions, not each other. Now, if you look at your typical job description versus a Sophia Foundation-based job description, this is your typical one. You'll get a few sentences. It's very aspirational. You'll see things like years of experience in certain technologies and so forth, right? And so everybody applies to this, but you haven't said what level of knowledge you want, what level of influence, complexity, or anything else. So Sophia breaks that down. It says, okay, here are the skills I need and the skills that would be nice to have. Here's what level I need to have them at. Here's the criteria that I'm going to assess them against. Oh, by the way, from a generic level of responsibility, here are the 5 attributes that I'm looking for. Now, what you would typically get is you have these generic emails that are sent to the candidates when they're not hired. They're not empathetic at all. They don't tell you what skills you were deficient in. They don't give you a roadmap. And when you got new professionals coming in, this really hits their self-efficacy. They're really thinking about, do I even need to be in this profession at this point? Or even older professionals who've been doing a job for a long time who want to transfer their skills into IT or another domain within IT. So it doesn't give any roadmap. But what if you gave them something like this? You would say, I wanted to hire you for a project manager role. However, looking at your skills, we wanted a level 4. You only exhibited a level 2 or a level 3. And if they ask you, well, give me some context around that. What do you mean level 2 or level 3 for product management or strategic planning? This is where you say, well, we break it down over 5 attributes here. So you may have been really good from the complexity. You were very technical. You were really good with working with routine tasks and non-routine tasks. But I needed a leader here, and your level of influence was significantly lower here. Or, I needed a high level of autonomy here as well, which means that I want you to be able to perform these without a lot of hand-holding. You see how much more context you get there? So now they can start getting the training, they can start following and start shadowing people who exhibit these actual attributes here. Now, what I want to leave you with here is a quote and something I want you to think about when you go home. Remember that years of experience requires less effort, and it unintentionally emphasizes that if we simply live longer or hold down a particular job, we'll eventually be rewarded. Now, the issue with this assumption is that we don't know how long we have left on this earth. So why not work on what's practical now instead of speculating about the future? I'd like to thank you for joining, and I'm going to pass this back over to John.
Right on, Blake. I love it. That really challenges the way things have been for eons, is maybe the right word of how long we've had inequitable hiring practices. And the future state of looking at a resume and only looking at skills and competencies is it's the holy grail of what I think really creates the workforce that everybody wants to work in, right?
Right.
So you got two links on your screen there, two QR codes. One, a Sophia assessment is absolutely free to an individual. So if you want to go and see what the Sophia stuff is all about, take somewhere between 10 minutes and probably no more than 45 or 50, depending upon how much experience you have with the different areas of Sophia. And there's also for the organizations out there, the first step is obviously kind of like AA, admitting you have a problem, right? And knowing what skills you have, right? As you mentioned earlier, how do we create a plan? It provides 50 to 60 pages of just some great insight on how you can look at digital skills measurement, assessment, strategy, how it can impact getting the right people on the right projects. There's a lot more to discuss. We could go on forever. Please check out those links, fill out those forms, and encourage you to link out Blake and myself on LinkedIn. Thanks and have a wonderful day.
Awesome, guys. Thank you for joining.